Hello everyone. Now we'll start the next topic of management of current assets, that is management of working capital management. So far we have completed the cash management, the receivables management, the inventory management. The fourth topic is working capital management. See, a normal business organization requires funds for two purposes. Funds required for increasing the fixed assets or increasing the to create the productive capacity. Purchasing the fixed assets, funds are required. Similarly, funds are required for day-to-day running of the business, called working capital. The amount required for day-to-day operations is called working capital. So working capital is nothing but the investment in current assets. Investment in current assets. So broadly we have two concepts of working capital called gross working capital and net working capital. Gross working capital denotes the total of investment in current assets. And net working capital means the current assets minus current liabilities. Net working capital means current assets minus current liabilities. So it is obvious that every business will invest the funds. Some of the funds are invested in current assets like stock, debtors, cash in hand, some other prepaid expenses, etc. paid in advance. So these are some of the current assets. And at the same time, the business also gets some credit period from the suppliers. The business has to pay some amount periodically. Some expenses are paid periodically. Like this, they will get some credit from the suppliers, and also they are investing some amount in the current assets. So normally current assets will be more than current liabilities. The current assets are kept at a higher figure than current liabilities. The working capital will have an impact on the profitability, liquidity and structural health of the company. It is the responsibility of the finance manager to have adequate working capital. The working capital should neither be less nor it should be more. Adequate working capital should be maintained. That is the responsibility of finance manager. So in this topic we are going to study about the meaning, importance of working capital. Then we'll discuss determinants of working capital cycle, and different types of working capital, and how to determine the working capital. These are the things we are going to discuss in this chapter, in this topic. So working capital management will affect the profitability, liquidity and structural health. Keeping high working capital means the profitability will come down, because current assets are not so productive, will not give as much profit as the fixed assets. Idle funds will not generate any income. We need sufficient current assets to meet the current liabilities, so that we have a proper liquidity position. So for that purpose we must have sufficient current assets to pay the current liabilities. So excessive current assets if we maintain, it will affect the profitability. But liquidity position is good. But liquidity position will be good. But in order to increase the profitability position, we have to decrease the current asset, then liquidity problem will arise. So these two, liquidity and profitability, are inversely related. अगर लिक्विडिटी को बढ़ाने के लिए अगर करंट असेट्स ज़्यादा रखेंगे, वर्किंग कैपिटल ज़्यादा रखेंगे, तो फिर प्रॉफिटेबिलिटी डाउन हो जाएगी. अगर प्रॉफिटेबिलिटी के लिए कम से कम करंट असेट्स रखेंगे तो लिक्विडिटी का प्रॉब्लम होगा. सो वर्किंग कैपिटल मैनेजमेंट पॉलिसीज शुड बी मेड बाय द फाइनेंस मैनेजर, सो दैट द प्रॉफिटेबिलिटी शुड बी हाई and also there should be proper liquidity and structural health of the business. So this topic of working capital management is very important from dual point of view, from liquidity as well as profitability. Apart from that, the structural health of the firm will also depend on working capital. Sometimes what will happen, the current ratio will show a high figure. That means the company is having more current assets than current liability. Current ratio and quick ratio shows satisfactory position. But in spite that current ratio and quick ratio are good, the liquidity problem of the business, the liquidity of the business is very bad, very poor. It may happen like this. The components of current assets are such that they are not easily convertible into cash. The meaning of the current assets is those assets which can be convertible into cash within a period of 1 year, easily convertible into cash. But sometimes what will happen, in the total current assets, we have some current assets which cannot be easily convertible into cash. Example is stock. अगर स्टॉक में कुछ डेड स्टॉक पड़ा हुआ है जिसका मार्केट में डिमांड नहीं है, तो स्टॉक तो है लेकिन इजीली कन्वर्टेबल इनटू कैश नहीं है, जिसकी वजह से करंट एसेट्स तो ज्यादा बता रहा. करंट एसेट्स इज शोइंग ए हाई फिगर, करंट रेशियो इज गुड, बट इन स्पाइट दैट liquidity problem will arise. So in this case, we cannot say that always if the current ratio and quick ratio are high, liquidity position is good. Always it cannot be said. So we have to see the structural health of the firm by seeing the components of the current assets. This shows the importance of working capital. Sufficient working capital should be maintained in order to have a good profitability and also proper liquidity and structural health of the organization. This is all about the meaning and the importance of working capital. Now we'll discuss about the working capital cycle. Actually, working capital cycle is a duration period from which a business is paying the cash for purchasing the raw material, and then incurring some expenditure on labor or overheads, etc. Then finally selling the goods and realizing the cash from the customers. So paying the cash and then receiving the cash. The duration from this period is called working capital cycle. This can be explained with the help of a simple example. Suppose a person is having some funds. These funds, with the help of these funds, he is purchasing the raw material. He is keeping the raw material in the godown for some time, because immediately after purchasing the material it cannot be converted into stock. Normally some 1 month is required. Normally some period is required to convert it into finished goods. So that raw material storage is, let it be 1 month. After 1 month the material from the godown or stores will be issued to the factory where it will be converted into finished goods. So here some labor is applied, some expenses are applied, so raw material will be converted into finished goods. Once the production cycle is completed, this work in progress will be converted into finished goods. Then finished goods will not be sold immediately. Suppose 1 month is the duration when the material is kept in the godown. 1 month is the duration when it's converted into work in progress, into finished goods. Then after completing it into finished goods, immediately it will not be sold. It will be kept in the showroom for sale. Suppose 1 month period is there. After that it is sold to the customer. The customer may not pay cash immediately. We are giving 1 month time period to the customer, credit period. Then after 1 month we are getting the cash, and with the help of this cash we are again purchasing the material. So the period from which we are paying the cash for material and we are receiving the cash from the customer, this is called working capital cycle. जितना ज्यादा वर्किंग कैपिटल साइकिल पीरियड रहेगा उतना वर्किंग कैपिटल का रिक्वायरमेंट ज्यादा. जितना शॉर्ट वर्किंग कैपिटल साइकिल रहेगा उतना वर्किंग कैपिटल का रिक्वायरमेंट कम रहेगा. तो वर्किंग कैपिटल डिपेंड्स ऑन द ड्यूरेशन ऑफ दिस वर्किंग कैपिटल साइकिल. देन determinants of working capital. In order to determine the working capital, a number of factors must be considered. See here, there is no general formula that by applying this formula we can be able to get how much material how much working capital we require. We cannot give any generalized formula. So here every business, every finance manager has to evaluate. Calculate how much is the working capital required in our business. So a number of factors will be considered. The main factors are, first one, production policies. See, the sales will not be constant throughout the year. कोई भी बिजनेस ऐसा नहीं रहता जहां पर सेल्स जो है यूनिफॉर्म इवन रहता throughout the year. Every month same amount of sales. No, the sales in some months the sales may be more, in some months the sales may be less. So accordingly the production, because production depends on sales, तो प्रोडक्शन भी क्या होगा, कोई महीने में ज्यादा होगा, कोई महीने में कम रहेगा. तो प्रोडक्शन के हिसाब से वर्किंग कैपिटल, when there is more production more working capital is required, when there is less production less working capital is required. Simple example I'll give you. There are many seasonal products. Example, let it say soft drinks. The demand for soft drinks will be more during summer period. As soon as the summer period is over, the demand for soft drinks will come down. So production of soft drinks will be more during summer period. और जैसे ही समर पीरियड खत्म हो गया, सॉफ्ट ड्रिंक का डिमांड कम हो गया, तो प्रोडक्शन भी कम हो जाएगा. तो वर्किंग कैपिटल मोर रिक्वायरमेंट ड्यूरिंग समर सीजन एंड वर्किंग कैपिटल लेस रिक्वायर्ड इन द अदर सीजन्स. तो प्रोडक्शन पॉलिसी के ऊपर डिपेंड कर रहा. द वर्किंग कैपिटल डिपेंड ऑन द प्रोडक्शन पॉलिसी. Similarly, nature of business. Second determinant is nature of business. See here, every business has different nature. All the businesses are not alike. Some are manufacturing business, some are trading business, some are service providing business. So different types of businesses are there. So it depends on the nature. Just like manufacturing firm is concerned with converting the raw material into finished goods. Trading business is the business which is concerned with buying from one party and selling it to another party. Nature is entirely different. So working capital depends on this. If a manufacturing firm is there, more working capital required. If a trading firm is there, less working capital is required. Even in the manufacturing business, some businesses will have more production cycle period. Some business will have less production cycle period. So in this way, the working capital depends on the nature of the business. Next, a credit policy. Previous topic, receivables management. We have seen different types of credit policies are there. Some are liberal credit policies, some are stricter credit policies. If a firm follows liberal credit policy, lengthy credit policy, more working capital is required. अगर कोई बिजनेस अपने क्रेडिट पीरियड ज्यादा दे रहा अपने कस्टमर को, 4 महीने 6 महीने तक दे रहा, तो इसका वर्किंग कैपिटल ज्यादा होगा. Some other businesses they are giving less credit period, only 1 month credit period, then working capital requirement will be less. So working capital depends on the credit policy. Next, inventory policy. The working capital requirement depends also on inventory, how we are keeping the inventory. Suppose we are using such a material where the demand is completely uncertain, the supply of material is completely uncertain. जो मटेरियल हम यूज कर रहे हैं वो मार्केट में मटेरियल कभी मिलता कभी नहीं मिलता, कभी शॉर्टेज हो जाता, अनसर्टेनिटी अटैच्ड है. तो इसके लिए वी विल कीप ए बफर स्टॉक, विल कीप ए सेफ्टी स्टॉक ऑफ दैट मटेरियल. ज्यादा पैसा मटेरियल में डाल के रख देंगे, कब मार्केट में अनसर्टेनिटी होती नहीं मालूम, तो इसका वर्किंग कैपिटल रिक्वायरमेंट ज्यादा होगा. अगर कोई बिजनेस में ऐसा मटेरियल यूज कर रहे हैं जो मटेरियल ऑलवेज अवेलेबल इन द मार्केट, देयर इज नो नीड टू कीप ए बफर स्टॉक. So in this case, what will happen? The working capital requirement will be less. Next, abnormal factors. The working capital also depends some abnormal or uncertain factors which may happen in the industry. Example, some strikes will be there, some lockouts, band, all these things will be there. These are all unexpected things. To meet these unexpected contingencies, some extra working capital will be required. हाँ, अगर कोई abnormal factors के chances नहीं हैं, then less working capital. Then operating efficiency. Working capital depends on the operating efficiency of all the resources. अब फाइनेंस है या मटेरियल है, मशीनरी है, लेबर है, अगर ये सारे रिसोर्सेस को इफेक्टिवली यूटिलाइज अगर करेंगे तो वी नीड लेस वर्किंग कैपिटल. Within less working capital we can be able to manage it. लेकिन अगर inefficiency ज्यादा होंगी, labor inefficiency, then inefficiency in the usage of material, usage of machines, etc., then more working capital will be required. Example, there is no efficiency in maintenance of the machinery. Machinery को maintenance करने के लिए कोई procedure, कोई plan वगैरह नहीं करे, so there will be suddenly breakdown of machinery. When there is suddenly breakdown, repairs, maintenance, etc., the cost will increase, working capital more requirement. Similarly, if the labor policies, if the plans, policies and labor utilization is not good, then labor charges will be more but the productivity will be less. So it depends on the efficiency, operating efficiency. Next is profit level. Many a times the profit will support the working capital. जो every year generate हो रहा profit, we are doing operating activities, we are purchasing the goods, selling the goods. In this activity we are earning some profit. Revenue is generated and this revenue will support the working capital. अगर profit level अच्छा रहेगा तो working capital को अच्छा support मिलेगा. अगर profitability बिल्कुल कम है तो how it can be able to support the working capital? तो profit level also affects the working capital. Next is price level changes, that is called inflation. Nowadays inflation is global. Every country we will have the inflation. The prices of goods and services are increasing. Similarly material prices. अब हमारे बिजनेस में मटेरियल यूज होता है, नॉर्मली 5 लाख रुपीस का मटेरियल यूज कर रहे हैं ऑन एन एवरेज, लेकिन ऑल ऑफ ए सडन ड्यू टू इन्फ्लेशन देयर मे बी चांस ऑफ 10% इंक्रीज इन मटेरियल प्राइस. इन्फ्लेशन की वजह से मटेरियल प्राइस इंक्रीज होने के चांसेस है. तो जब 5 लाख रुपीस का मटेरियल था 5,50,000 रुपीस का मटेरियल हो जाएगा. क्यों होगा? क्योंकि इन्फ्लेशन हो रहा है. So working capital also depends on the inflationary tendencies. So these are some of the factors which must be considered while determining the working capital requirement. Next is types of working capital. Broadly we divide the working capital into two categories: permanent working capital and temporary working capital. Permanent working capital is also called hardcore working capital. It is the minimum working capital which must be maintained to run the business at its minimum activities. कम से कम एक्टिविटी के लिए कितना वर्किंग कैपिटल रखना पड़ेगा जो हमेशा के लिए रहेगा. This working capital will always be there. Simple example I'll give you. In case of soft drinks company, the demand for soft drink will be more in the month, in the duration of summer season. But do you think that as soon as the summer is over, nobody will drink soft drink? The company will get closed? No. Throughout 12 months, production of soft drinks will be there. The only thing, during the month of summer, production will increase. During non-summer season, the production will decrease, but production will be there. So, minimum requirement of working capital is 5 lakh. ये कंपनी चलने के लिए कम से कम प्रोडक्शन के लिए 5 लाख रुपए वर्किंग कैपिटल. ये 5 लाख रुपए वर्किंग कैपिटल थ्रू आउट द ईयर रहेंगे, 12 मंथ्स में रहेंगे बराबर. सो मिनिमम वर्किंग कैपिटल रिक्वायर्ड फॉर कंटिन्यूअस एक्टिविटी, मिनिमम प्रोडक्शन इज कॉल्ड परमानेंट वर्किंग कैपिटल. सो एवरी बिजनेस विल हैव अ हार्डकोर वर्किंग कैपिटल, परमानेंट वर्किंग कैपिटल, और वी कैन से फिक्स्ड वर्किंग कैपिटल. टेम्पररी वर्किंग कैपिटल, any working capital which is more than the permanent working capital, the working capital which is in excess of temporary working capital is called temporary working capital. Example, in case of soft drinks again, the minimum working capital required is 5 lakh. On an average 5 lakh rupees is the minimum fixed working capital throughout the year. But when summer comes, when summer season arrives, immediately the production requirement will be more. The requirement will be more. So working capital requirement will jump to 12 lakh. 12 lakh rupees working capital is required during the month, during the period of summer. So normal working capital, permanent working capital is 5 lakh. So how much is the increase from 5 lakh to 12 lakh? So 7 lakh rupees is the increment in working capital. But this 7 lakh rupees excess working capital is a temporary working capital. It is required only during the duration of summer period. That's all. So this is temporary working capital. Any capital which is over and above permanent working capital. Now we'll come to optimum working capital. Optimum working capital is that working capital at which there is good profitability and also proper liquidity and structural health. See here, every business, the profitability and liquidity will be affected by working capital. The working capital should neither be inadequate nor the working capital should be excessive. अगर excessive working capital अगर रहेगा तो what will happen? No doubt the risk will come down. The risk will come down. What risk? Liquidity risk. Liquidity का risk कम हो जाएगा हम ज्यादा working capital रखेंगे तो. लेकिन there is a direct relationship between risk and return. Higher the risk, higher the return. Lower the risk, lower the return. अगर रिस्क को कम करने के लिए अगर ज्यादा वर्किंग कैपिटल रखेंगे तो रिस्क तो कम होगा लेकिन प्रॉफिटेबिलिटी भी कम हो जाएगी. प्रॉफिटेबिलिटी कम हो जाएगी. अब प्रॉफिटेबिलिटी को बढ़ाने के लिए, अगर प्रॉफिटेबिलिटी को इंक्रीज करने के लिए वी हैव रिड्यूस द वर्किंग कैपिटल, वी हैव रिड्यूस द वर्किंग कैपिटल, देन व्हाट विल हैपन? व्हाट विल प्रॉफिटेबिलिटी विल इंक्रीज बट लिक्विडिटी विल कम डाउन. सो while maintaining the working capital, we must see the risk factor. How much risk is there? Another term is the funds required for working capital is for short-term funds. And normally short-term funds we can procure at a higher rate of interest. Whereas long-term funds we can procure at a lower rate of interest. That's why investing in working capital is a costly affair, because we are getting the funds at a higher rate of interest. So, optimum working capital every business must maintain. Every finance manager must try to keep optimum, neither excessive nor inadequate. Adequate working capital should be maintained, so that a good profitability and also a proper liquidity position and structural health should be maintained. That shows the optimum working capital. The last is estimation of working capital requirement. Working capital को requirement मालूम करने के लिए first of all we have discussed about the different factors, different determinants. ये सारे determinants को consider करके we will determine working capital. But apart from that, there are some methods of practically calculating working capital. Practically, analytically, we can be able to calculate the requirement of working capital apart from considering these factors. What are the methods which are available for estimating the requirement of working capital? First method is estimation of components of working capital. Estimation of components of working capital. This is the most popular method of determining the requirement of working capital. So what does this method says? Working capital is the difference between current assets and current liabilities. The different current assets are cash in hand, cash at bank, then stock, debtors, bills receivable, etc. Debtors है, stock है, cash in hand है, ये सारे current assets हैं, ये components of current assets. इसी तरह components of current liabilities are creditors, bills payable, short-term loans, etc. These are the current liabilities. So what we do is we estimate each and every component. How much cash in hand normally we require to keep. कितना cash in hand normally हमको रखना चाहिए. Let it be 20,000. Always we should have 20,000 rupees cash in hand. Second, similarly, how much normally we are maintaining the inventory, stock. Godown में stock में कितना material रह रहा है, कितने finished goods रह रहे हैं, कितना work in progress रह रहा है. So we calculate what is the value of inventory on an average in our business. So we got cash in hand, we got inventory. Thirdly, how much are the receivables, debtors? So in our business, on an average, how much are the debtors? We calculate. We got the total. अब ये तीनों का total, cash in hand, stock, debtors, ये तीनों का जो total है current assets. From this we deduct the current liabilities. Normally how much bills payable we will have, how much on an average creditors we have, we'll get the total of current liability. So total of current assets minus total of current liability will get net working capital. This method is called components of working capital method. Individually each component we are calculating and then we are finding out the required working capital. And most of the problems will apply this estimation method. This is the most common method of estimating the requirement of working capital. Second, percentage of sales method. This is the second method. In this percent of sales method, we make a relationship between sales and working capital according to the past data. Previous 5 years. पीछे के 5 साल में हम we calculate how much was the working capital and how much were the sales on an average. Previous 5 years का average working capital निकाल लिए from the balance sheet. Every year balance sheet is prepared. In the balance sheet we'll have the current assets, current liabilities. Current assets minus current liability will get the working capital. So we have calculated average working capital of the past 5 years. Similarly we calculate average sales of the 5 years. वही 5 साल के sales का average मानो. तो average working capital divided by average sales into 100. We'll get a percentage of working capital on sales. And that percentage we apply during the current year. अब current year में हमारा sales expected कितना है? Suppose the sales are 10 lakh rupees. 10 lakh rupees are the expected sales during the current year. And according to the past data, 30% is the working capital on sales. So 10 lakh ka 30%, 3 lakh rupees. So we can say current year working capital requirement is 3 lakh because the working capital is 30% on sales. How we got 30% according to the past? This is very easy method, traditional method. but there are a number of drawbacks. It's a crude method, not an accurate method, because it is not necessary that there is always a linear relationship between working capital and sales. दोनों में linear relationship रहना जरूरी नहीं है. Sometimes the sales may increase but working capital may not increase. Sometimes the percentage of working capital will be more than the percentage of sales. In that case, this method is not applied in real practice. Then third one is operating cycle approach. Operating cycle or working capital cycle means one and the same. In this operating cycle approach, what we do is we calculate how much is the time duration storage of raw material in the godown. Material on an average कितने period, कितने days में, कितने months तक godown में रहा. Secondly, how much time the material is converted into finished goods in work in progress. तो कितना ड्यूरेशन गोडाउन में रह रहा, स्टॉक में रह रहा, और कितना ड्यूरेशन में WIP बन रहा, फिर कितने ड्यूरेशन में फिनिश्ड स्टॉक स्टेज में स्टोरेज रह रहा, कितना टाइम पीरियड वी आर अलाउइंग टू डेटार्स एंड हाउ मच टाइम पीरियड वी आर गेटिंग फ्रॉम द क्रेडिटर्स. तो ऑपरेटिंग साइकिल का एक इक्वेशन है O is equal to R plus W. I'll show it like this. O is equal to R plus W plus F plus D minus C. O stands for operating cycle duration period. R stands for raw material storage period. W stands for WIP, work in progress storage period. Finished goods storage period. Debtors credit period, creditors credit period. So R plus W plus F plus D minus C. Example, let it be 15 days we are having in raw material in the godown. Then 15 days in work in progress. 30 days finished goods plus 30 days in debtors. And 10 days allowed by creditors. So we can say working capital 30 plus 30, 60, 90, 90 minus 10, 80 days. वर्किंग कैपिटल साइकिल इज 80 days. 80 days में एक वर्किंग कैपिटल साइकिल कंप्लीट होगा. तो हाउ मेनी साइकिल्स वी कैन बी एबल टू कंप्लीट इन 1 year? हाउ मेनी साइकिल्स वी कैन बी एबल टू कंप्लीट इन 1 year? तो 365 days divided by 80 days will get the number of cycles in 1 year. Example, 365 divided by 80, we are getting 4.56. In 1 year, we are getting 4.56 cycles. Now, ultimately, we want how much working capital required. So, we need the total operating cost. How much is the total operating cost for 1 year? So, working capital requirement is equal to total operating cost divided by number of working capital cycles. Divided by number of working capital cycles. Example, total operating cost in 1 year is 10 lakh rupees. 10 लाख रुपए टोटल ऑपरेटिंग कॉस्ट है, और एक साल में कितने साइकिल्स बन रहे हैं? 4.56 साइकिल्स. तो 10 lakh divided by 4.56. 10 lakhs is the total operating cost. Divide by 4.56. 10 lakhs divided by 4.56 is equal to 2,19,000. 2,19,299 or 300. 2,19,300. This is the working capital required. This is also one of the method of calculating the working capital. This is called operating cycle approach. First, we determine what is the duration of one operating cycle. Secondly, we calculate how many operating cycles will be conducted in 1 year. So 365 divided by one operating cycle period will get number of operating. The total operating cost. The total operating cost divided by number of operating cycles will get the working capital requirement. This is the complete theory of this working capital management. So what we have discussed, first of all, what is the meaning of the term working capital? Working capital refers to investment in current assets. तो gross working capital, net working capital. Gross means the total of current assets. Net का मतलब total current assets minus current liability. And we have seen every business must keep working capital management policies, because this working capital will affect the profitability and liquidity of the business.